to order the meeting of the Town Government Study Committee. Do I have a motion to open the meeting?
Motion to open.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay, very good. So in attendance tonight, we have John Osborne, John Christopher, Andrew Cox, and Mike Dempsey. We also have on the phone our colleague Betty Gorski, who will be an active participant in our meeting, including if there's any votes involved, Betty will certainly have the opportunity to vote on any matter. So what I'm going to do first is read out the agenda. And let me see, I think I gave copies to everybody, and I didn't keep one, so hold on a minute. Oh, here it is, I've got it. So the agenda for tonight's meeting consists of 3 sections. The first one is the reading of the minutes from the October 22nd meeting. The second is the review of a modified initial draft to advise the Board of Selectmen on the manner of implementing a town manager through bylaws based on Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 41, Section 23. And then the third item will be discussion and possible votes on draft completion and presenting to town departments as well as posting on the website. Now, what I'd like to do at these meetings is to maximize public participation and awareness as to what we're working on, where we are. And so with the consent of the board.
Can I make a point of order?
Sure, point of order, go ahead.
Just a little typo, I guess, in the
If you can speak up a little bit, because I know we have to wear masks.
typo in the agenda. The 4123A deals with town administrators or executive secretaries. It's not a town manager
Okay.
per se, so I don't want to have
What is the
anyone-
correct chapter?
Just, I think you mentioned town manager instead of
Oh,
town
that's right, town, okay.
administrator.
I did
Oh,
say that.
slight correction. It's basically a distinction without a difference, but
Okay, that's what it does say on the agenda notice, so, but thank you for the correction on that, thank you. So, the reason for me to read out the minutes is just to get people oriented as to what we're working on, where we are in the process, and where we hope to go. Especially with COVID-19, we just don't have an opportunity to invite the public into a space with us, and there isn't an opportunity for public comment. So, in order for people to follow us along, I thought that reading of the minutes will get us oriented, kind of like what chapter did we leave off in the book, and let's continue the, reading this together. So, without further ado, let me do that. I'll even make a couple of comments, just so people understand the process here. So, on October 22nd, we opened the meeting at 5:40. The motion was made by Mr. Dempsey, seconded by Mr. Osborne, and unanimously we opened the meeting. In attendance was Mr. Osborne, Mike Dempsey, Mr. Christopher, and myself. We also approved the minutes from September 29th, which was submitted by Mr. Christopher, seconded by Mr. Osborne, and that was also unanimous. Then I, the chair, signed the paper copy to submit to town clerk by the secretary, and the secretary of our committee is Mr. Dempsey. So, we discuss the results of the subcommittee draft number 1. Little side note, we created a subcommittee a few weeks ago with John Osborne and John Christopher so that they could actually begin the very serious work of drafting a document. So we had draft document number 1 as a discussion item. So the discussion ensued as follows. Mr. Osborne stated that they decided that the North Andover format seemed best. They went through 21 bylaws, they meaning John and John. They went through 21 bylaws from other towns and tried to find uncommon items. Nahant had a nicely compressed list, and it was incorporated into the North Andover document. Mr. Christopher said some editing and their own ideas were added. They added control over current town finance and personnel bylaws. Eventually, the gentleman asserted that the personnel bylaw needs some changes. Mr. Osborne asked about the items received from the Board of Selectmen discussions, and we'll have a discussion about that. These are items that we're going to go through a little bit later. Did they contain too much minutia? Mr. Dempsey explained that these were meant to be included in a job description or contract, not as entries for the bylaw. We discussed the personnel issues and how to draft and how the draft addressed them. In the draft document, we made some changes, and because I'm reading the minutes publicly, I have to go through it all, okay, even though some of it is technical here. Section 3J, we changed the word coordinate to facilitate, to get committees to work together. Section 3V on grants looks okay, just so the public understands. Town administrators, town managers, finance directors have an opportunity, and other department heads have opportunities to seek funding sources through grants. So there will be language about grant writing and development in our work. Section 3Z, coordinate emergency planning changes. There are some redundancies that will be eliminated in the next draft. That's the one we're going to cover tonight. Use of town council by the administrator shall not be limited. We had a very healthy discussion as to whether we should restrict, expand, or leave alone access to town council by a future town administrator or manager. Recreation and informational technology are areas that can be addressed under oversee and coordination of departments and job duties section. Direction of independent departments like water and sewer and electric could be reorganized if that was desired. School budgets are coordinated through the finance committee. The school department should liaison through administrator and finance committee. And that was the essence of our previous meeting. And then we called the date today for tonight's meeting. So just to finalize the orientation, we adopted this concept of a two-step method, and that is that instead of going to the general court, to the state of Massachusetts, and ask them to implement a law that would have to be approved by the legislator and actually ultimately signed by the governor, we decided to do a pre-step, and that is to create the town administrator through a local bylaw. And through that local bylaw, that would hopefully give us the opportunity to grow into the position, tweak it, so that ultimately, to the town's satisfaction and with the support of the townspeople, we ultimately will, at a later date, go to the state and formalize it and make it a little bit more permanent. So without further ado, I do want to open up this section of the
Can I make a motion,
Sure.
Mr. Chair, to accept the minutes
Oh,
as
yes,
submitted?
motion to accept the minutes as read. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous. So the draft number 2 is the good work of John Christopher and John Osborne, and I really am going to turn this meeting over to you to introduce it and provide your wisdom, your thoughts, and input in how we should proceed through this document. I did read it twice. I have some questions, and I'm thrilled and really, really thankful for the work that you've done, so thank you.
Could I make a comment?
Sure,
before we
please
get
do.
going?
Floor is yours.
We did look through 21 bylaws, but I think if you go through the process of looking at 21 bylaws, you may like to look at even more. In other words, cull it down. I would have to say probably John and I online looked maybe at 40 bylaws. The ones we didn't select to be included in the number 21, we didn't give it the scrutiny because you could tell right off the bat they weren't. But it was a laborious effort. And I think it's important that the public know that in going into this, we had a multi-page memorandum laying out the legal foundations on how to approach a town manager, town administrator, the methods of doing it. We also had the memorandum give us a history of town government in Massachusetts from the colonial times. And so I think that we've made a very comprehensive approach to this matter. It's not like we got together at Dunkin' Donuts and wrote down things on the back of a napkin. And
Well,
I wanted to reiterate because there may be new folks coming in
yeah,
and
that's a
watching.
good point, and I wanted to also say, again, very thankful for your work, but you had introduced the concept of a bylaw first, but I didn't realize that it's a popular strategy for a lot of municipalities. They'll try big things like this by bylaw first, and then either leave it by bylaw or graduate, for lack of a better word, to a legislative act.
Yeah, I think it was, we've discussed how the town of Hingham did it. They started with a bylaw, and they enjoyed it so much that they made it a special act legislation, which is essentially your first step in having a town charter, if you choose not to go through the whole charter commission procedure. So, and then you build off of that.
Great, thank you. John, the floor is yours. Please lead us through this wonderful document here.
Well, I'll defer to Mr. Osborne.
All right, thank you. At the first piece I'd like you to look at, if you could turn to the second page and number 4. It says, upon appointment, the town administrator shall post a bond at an amount fixed by the Board of Selectmen and provide professional liability insurance in an amount satisfactory to the Board of Selectmen, naming the town as the lost payee. Now, we noted that this was present in probably 2 of the town's bylaws. It's not a common practice. We have incorporated it because we thought it would certainly open for discussion. Do you want to keep it, or do you want to get rid of it?
I looked at that, and I'll just weigh in very quickly. That was something I normally saw it on the school committee. I think it's a good idea. I didn't know it was that unpopular.
It's not that popular, it just, it wasn't incorporated, that's all.
And I put in professional liability insurance. I'm not even quite sure if town administrators, they insure them that way, but I said, well, bond or professional liability insurance, either one. And I know town clerks have to post bonds, and
Does anyone else have any thoughts on that matter?
Do they have to pay for it themselves?
yeah, the premium, they'd have to post bond.
So can you describe for the general public, and a refresher for me, what is posting a bond, what that actually does?
I'm going to refer.
Well, you post a bond, or liability insurance means if there's negligence that costs the town money, there's an insurance company who hopefully will step forward to reimburse the town. A bond is essentially the same way. There are different methods of making claims against it, and a bonding company. Most notably, you see bonds in a legal sense, at least from my experience, at probate court when someone takes over being the administrator of $1 million estate. Sometimes he has to post a bond with surety, or an insurance company bond. In other words, if he walks out with the money and goes down to Foxwood,
Right.
the bonding company covers him for any, covers
Okay.
the town or the estate for any loss created by his malfeasance.
So if a town administrator does a really bad thing and we have a loss, we have a mechanism for recover that loss with the bond. Let me share this with Betty as well. Betty, any thoughts about that? About posting a bond? You comfortable with that language in this bylaw?
I think we'd be foolish not to have it.
Okay.
That's just my opinion, but did John Christopher say it's sort of called, is it a negligence insurance? Is that what you said, John?
Well, the professional liability insurance normally covers people for negligence.
Professional
A bond-
liability
a
insurance
bond,
covers for negligence.
Yeah, a bond wouldn't necessarily, it could be for someone who committed malfeasance. In other words, they wrote a check in favor of themselves out of the town treasury and took off. That would be more than negligence, so the bond would cover that type of action.
I see. So the bond will cover things that a professional liability might not, like.
Might not.
Like straight out malfeasance.
Yeah.
Someone, as John said, someone writing, an administrator writing a check out to himself.
Intentional conduct.
Yeah, okay.
Is there a threshold? What's a recommended number? Does it go by community, or is there a standard number that you should have for the bond?
I think that would be something that the selectmen could speak to a bonding company about, and, I'm not sure. I know,
The town clerk has one.
yeah, town clerk has one, so that may be some guidance. I know in courts, it's usually the size of the matter they're handling, although this is a $60 million budget or something like that, so I believe that, 30, okay. I don't expect them to post a bond for 30 million. That might be quite expensive,
Yeah,
but
that'd be a lot of malfeasance.
yeah. The town would be in receivership at that point. So,
Andrew or Mike, thoughts? opinion?
Absolutely, I think it should be in there. You're handing a lot of authority and responsibility to one individual. You have no idea what they may or may not do
Yeah.
3, 4, 5 years down the road. So to have any form of insurance, nothing wrong with it.
We had a situation in town, if I recall, 30 years ago, that it was more of a mistake, but we couldn't account for $100,000 in the budget.
Wow.
And
I remember that.
I think a bonding company might be helpful in that point, to cover a loss like that.
So I'm glad you brought it up, because in asking the question, it's an expense item. You know, it's gonna cost us money, so you asking us, are you comfortable with it, is, I think you're
Yes.
brushing against that as well. So, yeah, thank you. So I think we're unanimously in consent here that,
Okay, well, that's
It's
what
a-
I needed to know.
thank you.
Okay, now, what I'd like you to do, I've handed out a sheet of paper to you, which essentially was, I think, a laundry list of pieces of work that was either going to be in the bylaw or in some kind of contract when they hire the person. And I think in this document, there is some, how can I say, redundancies and but nevertheless, I'd like to go through the items and refer, if you notice in these little scribbles on the left of the sheet I have shown you, you'll see some little hand scratching, which actually is my rather nasty handwriting. There's a preamble which deals with, for instance, 1A, B, and B. And if you want to read the preamble, you can refer to that by looking at that in your own time, or you can look at it now. I don't mind which. We can move through this.
You adopted this preamble here on number
No,
2?
No, this one
I was
I
gonna
gave
say
you,
on the,
this one here,
right.
summary of.
Summary of, yes, I did read it, but we won't read it tonight.
So it refers, when you look at that question, supervisors, town departments, direct day-to-day affairs, etc., then you look at the preamble and see, does the preamble cover those conditions? And you can decide whether it does or it doesn't.
So,
In our opinion, it does.
And plus, the statute, 4123A, specifically says that there's an agency relationship between the selectman and the town administrator, and that's a pretty broad coverage, if you can just go back to the statute. But we incorporated that type of idea into the preamble.
you said an agency relationship?
Principal agent, essentially.
Makes sense.
The selectmen are the policymakers, the administrator carries out the day-to-day operations of the town, which are under the responsibility of the selectmen,
Right.
not necessarily under the chief of police or the fire chief, but the
Right.
selectmen.
So, just to get Betty and our public members oriented, and especially Betty does have the opportunity to see us holding up pieces of paper here. So what this is it was emailed to me, it was an Excel sheet, it was very wide.
No, hold it, we're talking about.
Was it not
the
that?
document here. This is referring to, oh, yes.
Yeah,
that's
this
right.
piece here, yeah. It's an Excel sheet, and basically there were marks in boxes that showed different towns, different aspects of what administrative assistants, finance directors, and town managers and town administrator positions did. And I believe that check the box method was utilized to convert for the finance director's position to some degree in the area of personnel. Is that about right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. See, I did my homework, so. 'cause
And
I'm gonna have to work under your standards, so thank you.
My understanding
Good standard.
too, Joe, is that this list here is more of whoever produced it, kind of, I think it's almost like a job description as to what they would,
Yeah, a lot of it is job description, no
Yeah.
question about that. Well, however, I did feel that it was pretty comprehensive, and I thought that it would be helpful to look through this job description and see what sections of the document actually addresses these issues. And as I said,
Which
number one-
document, John?
Sorry,
Which document?
the draft.
Oh, the draft that you, okay, very
The
good.
draft document addresses these issues. The preamble in document draft 2
Mm-hmm,
addresses 1A and 1B.
I see.
Okay? When we get down to 1D, 2E covers that. If you turn to the second, about second or third page, no, second page, and look down at the bottom of the page, you'll see 2E, and I think you'll see it addresses it. And when we get to F, 2F, you'll see 2F deals with that issue. And also G, 2F deals with G as well. Okay? So you can look at the document and decide whether you think it covers that. Now, this means you're gonna have to read it and look at it and think about it and decide whether you like it. If you don't, that's fine too. Now, you'll notice that there are some pink marks on the document I've handed to you with a cross across it. It doesn't look like pink, but it was when I copied it. And oversees and administers all licenses, permits under the jurisdiction of the Boston Board of Selectmen. We've crossed that out because we don't feel that that is pertinent to being in the bylaw. Where you see the pink crossing outs, we don't believe that that should be in the bylaw. It might be in the job description, but it's certainly not in the bylaw.
And a point I'd like to make, and John knows this quite well, is if you go to section 2, I believe, in the bylaw, 2N, it requires the town administrator to perform all duties assigned to him by the Board of Selectmen that are within their jurisdiction, for example, licenses and permits, but not otherwise set out in the bylaw. So in other words, the selectman can say, you know, go ahead and coordinate and oversee the, you know, licenses and permits, but I don't think that should be in the bylaw. But you know why? Because a new Board of Selectmen may say, we want to do that personally.
Well, Mike had cautioned us on a few occasions, thank you for your thought, Mike, I'm speaking for you here, but you can chime in, there are things that belong in the bylaw and things that belong in the law and things that belong in the job description. So your auditing of that document, I think, has done a really good job in picking out things that should not go into the bylaw. That's the focus, especially the pink items. They jumped right out at me. They look like minutia, nitty-gritty stuff that should go into a job description.
That's
So, Mike, any thoughts,
No, but like we said last time, that was what this was. When the selectmen were working on this, they were trying to put a job description together really for, the finance director and figure out which way to go. They weren't really working on a bylaw. They were really working on keeping things the way they were, but better defining what the finance director's job was.
I also have a feeling that in this area of employment, that town administrators probably have a sample contract that they work off of. They have an association, so I'm sure there's a lot of things that they go into negotiating a contract and have certain items.
I don't mind the town administrator negotiating a job description. I hope that our work will stand on its own so they don't have to negotiate the bylaw.
Well, that's why,
That should be unassailable.
my thoughts in this, and I think John has the same idea, is that government, to be effective, has to be flexible. And we don't want to lock them into a cookbook approach to having a town administrator.
We want to make sure that we don't make it so comprehensive that anyone who reads it is so frightened they don't even want the job. If you see my point. Okay, moving on. 1I is covered by 2A. In section 2A, supervises all positions in the finance department on a daily basis. That's covered in 3.1. Prepares and oversees all budgets under jurisdiction of the Board of Selectmen. That's covered in 3.4. responsible to see that the budget is administered as adopted by the town meeting, that's covered in 3.4. D, we've rejected that. Reviews and oversees management of all town trusts. I'm not sure whether we should have that in or not.
That's in the bylaw for the finance director.
Okay.
The finance department, I should say.
It's in the
Yeah.
the finance.
Department bylaw,
Oh, the
two
finance
dash 30,
department bylaw.
2-36A.
Okay, thank you, that's finance department bylaw, okay, very good. That's covered then,
Yes.
okay. Then we get down to 2E, and we reports to finance board and board of selectmen on financial matters affecting the town, that's covered in 2B.
That's in there, yeah.
And disperse funds and sign checks pursuant to approval of warrants by board of selectmen is covered by 3.2. That's item 2F. Then there's item 2G, which is covered by 4.4. And then finally, create policies and procedures and responsible for collection of all monies received by departments. Essentially, it's covered in 3.1. Although I don't think we need to write that out in specific detail. I think 3.1's language is adequate for that.
And also, the finance department bylaw has a lot of language about
And the finance-
budgets and
okay,
coordination with
finance bylaw, okay.
departments. So I think we're covered one way or the other.
Okay. See, there are two bylaws that we're really having to dovetail with. One's the finance bylaw and the other is the personal bylaw. And that means that some of this language that we don't have is in those documents.
And we also, on the personnel line of thinking, we have the personal procedures manual.
Which, by the way, is 33
And
pages long.
it's really the Bible of human resources in the town.
Yeah.
And
I've read it.
we reference that in this bylaw, that the personnel administrator, we make him the the town administrator is the personnel officer. And that's the language they have in the procedures manual, that it's usually the assistant to the town board of selectmen is the personnel officer. So we're sliding him into that position. The procedures manual, I think, will govern a lot of the human resources, and it
The
does.
personal bylaw is, as I said, 33 pages long, and it's quite comprehensive. Covers just about everything.
I read it 4 years ago. I studied
Okay,
it 4 years ago.
yes, when you were a selectman, okay. Finally, we're moving along to the issue of for personnel, and A, B, and C are all covered in the personal bylaw.
They are.
And D is covered in 2.2, and 4E is covered in personal bylaw and 2.2, and F we are rejecting. Interviews and oversees the interview process for all employees and board members appointed by the Board of Selectmen. I think that's it. That can be covered in some other language, but we are not.
I think to
putting
a
that-
degree, we touch upon it in the bylaw that, with the advice and consent of the selectmen,
You absolutely did. You put
Yeah.
it in the bylaw, but you created it in a way that would say, okay, basically, for that one position, the Board of Selectmen will say to the town administrator, please, go into the, help us with selecting that person, go
Right.
through the process.
Okay.
But it's not automatic.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
not part of their job description, will it be? Because it's not part of the bylaw, the way you've designed it.
That is correct. And finally, for G is in 5.1. If you look in 5.1, you'll be able to look at that and see that it covers that.
So just so Betty knows, I'm holding this up again. This comparison, all these data points, you did an audit. And then you populated the ones that seemed to make sense into draft number 2.
That is correct.
And you didn't even do that with all of them, because some of them are already embedded in 2 other policies, personnel policy and finance
That is
policy.
correct. You got it. It's good having a chairman who's bright, isn't it?
that's right.
It's good. Thank you,
That's why we chose him.
That's why we chose.
He's the
him.
smartest guy in the room.
Okay, turning the page, the second page, we're at point 4, I think, 4H, aren't we? 4H? Yes, 4H. recommends appointment and removal on relevant positions and membership on committees. That's covered in 6.1.
Good.
And it's still the selectmen, they have advice and consent powers on that, so it's not like he's freelancing.
You did a lot of advice and consent by Board of Selectmen
Yeah.
throughout this whole document. I thought it was great. Again, I have no reference. I've never done this type of work before. I don't know if that is typical, or is this unique to us? or-
I think it's important because he's in that agency relationship.
Yeah.
And he really has to report back, he or she, I shouldn't just use the word he. Probably plenty of fine town administrators that were women and men and,
Yeah.
so, but, yeah, I think it's important to keep the selectmen can always, if they feel they want to give this person more freedom, they can do it.
Yeah.
They can do it. But I didn't want to write a document that all of a sudden that the Board of Selectmen looks like they're on the outside looking in.
Yeah.
Moving on to the next item, which is 5, communication. 5A, keep the Board of Selectmen fully informed regarding all department operations, fiscal affairs, general problems, et cetera. That's covered in 2B.
2B, yeah.
And then we come to 5B, serves as public relations and communications officer of the town. John and I talked about that, and I think we rejected that. We think that's the Board of Selectmen's responsibility.
And under 2N of the bylaw, they can always delegate that to him
Mhm.
if they so wish.
And similarly, if they choose, they can maintain the town website and Facebook page. I think that was done by our previous financial director. However, I don't think we should insist on that in the bylaw. If you, in the contract, want that to be in, you put it in.
Yeah.
But it's not appropriate for a bylaw, I don't believe.
And plus, depending on who you get as an administrator, they may have great administration skills, but their IT skills with respect to websites may not be up to snuff.
Exactly. Okay. Moving along, 6, recreation. This is a horny, tough issue. Coordinates with the Recreation Committee and in-town sports groups on the use of town fields. Again, this is not appropriate for the bylaw. I think that's to be discussed if you want. I think, quite frankly, I think even if it's in the contract, I think it has to be put in somewhat circumspect, because that is a political hot potato. And I think only once the financial administrator, the administrator, town administrator has established a relationship with the people of the town, will he be able to tackle that thorny issue?
Plus, once again, under 2N, the selectmen can keep that to their doing, or they can delegate to him if they want to have him schedule field use, whom I'm sure he'll pass that on to his assistant. So I agree with John, it shouldn't be written into a bylaw.
And finally, 7, long-range planning. We've covered this to some extent. Coordinates all activities among boards, committees, and commissions concerned with long-range municipal planning. That's covered in 2E. Researches and next is 7B. Researches and recommends to the Board of Selectmen on bylaw changes. That, it seems to me, should not be left to the administrator. That's a question as to where it should belong. I don't know. I think you should have a committee like ourselves who might work on that item.
Well, for example, in zoning and planning matters, the town planner should be heavily involved in that.
Exactly.
And I know the building inspector in the past has put together ad hoc committees to look at where we can make improvements in zoning bylaws and
Right.
planning regulations, so.
And by operation and tradition and, reality, the Finance Committee does a very good job with that as well, and overlooking, how to operate this government within our financial constraints.
Right. And then finally, moving along at 7C, we didn't think that was really too appropriate, but we put it in 2L. I think 2L covers it to some extent. And then 7 7D is covered in 3.1. And then finally, I think the 7E is covered in 6.1. And that leaves us to the end of the story.
Well, any thoughts? Well, let me start with Betty. I'll go around the table. Based on what you heard, Betty, I know it's a little convoluted because we're going through a list of items that we like, we don't like, what belongs in the draft, but what's your sense of things based on what you heard and saw?
Well, there's a lot to cover. And when you put it out there the way this committee is, you know, when John said the recreation, the fields, has been a hot potato for many, many years. I think it's always a work of progress. The long-range planning goes hand in hand with the finance committee. Is that what you said, Joe?
Yes, financial, yep.
Yeah, and you talked about the bylaw, the law, and the job description, which gets complicated. So, you know, I wish I had the documents that you have. I should have caught up with you, Joe, to get those. But, you know, a lot has been put into this, and we're trying to hit on everything we possibly can so it doesn't become a problem later on, or say it's, you know, we didn't address that, and
No
we
worries.
don't want to freeze the Board of Selectmen out.
Yeah,
They-
I'll
they
drive
need to
over a
be a
copy
part
for
of
you.
that.
I'll bring over a copy for you to read after the meeting.
And that's my fault, Joe. That's not
It's
yours.
okay. No,
fault.
no
I should have
worries.
caught up with you.
It's okay. It's fine.
But, you know, I think the Dr. John and Attorney John have done a great job.
They have, and you just gave me an idea, but I'm gonna go around the table first. So Mike, your thoughts?
Yes, so I think this is a very important document because what this should be provided with anything else we provide to the selectmen in particular, because the selectmen need to see that we have taken their work and expanded on it where necessary, put it into the bylaw, or said, you know, this is already covered under other bylaws, or, you know, other things belong in a job description in the future to be done, so.
So you're
you know,
talking about the comparison table?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, so I think this should be definitely part of our
Oh, absolutely,
document,
yeah.
final documentation
I mean, this is
that we
it's
provide.
a serious audit, if you will.
Yeah.
It's a good audit, so thank you for that. That's just that was a separate piece of work that these two gentlemen did. and
John did it.
Besides this, so
Except for the phone call I got at 7:45 this morning.
John led that, John Osborne.
Okay,
Andrew, your thoughts?
I think this is a actually easy to follow document. Appreciate all the work. It
Thank you.
looks great. Very detailed. I do like the flexibility about the Board of Selectmen being able to keep some responsibilities or send them off to the administrator if they want to, because ultimately, once the administrator is in the position and has a contract for 1 or 3 years, the only voice that people have is the Board of Selectmen. So to have them working more together versus, as you stated, outside looking in, I think is very important and seems like a good balance between the two.
Let me do something, if you don't mind,
it's all right.
for the
I've got
benefit, because
one
Betty
other-
gave me a
before-
thought.
Joe, before you
Yeah,
summarize, there's
Yeah.
one other item. I need.
okay, go ahead, yes.
And I have an item too.
Okay, please
And
proceed.
that is, if you remember, you sent us these spreadsheets.
Right,
Well, I didn't spend a lot of time comparing the different towns.
Good.
It seemed terribly useful. However, you had items essentially listed from number 4 down to number 61. And a lot of those items are actually covered in this summary that we've just dealt with. However, there are 2 items in here that I felt that were not covered in this summary, this laundry list. And I'm going to bring them up. And these are number 47, which says coordinate and manage all financial information received from the Board of Assessors. We make no reference to the Board of Assessors at all. And I think, John and I disagree on this one. I think we should say something to that effect.
I think that's covered under the finance director thing, because it talks about,
If it's in the financial
it doesn't,
bylaw, that's fine.
it doesn't say assessors per se, but it says coordinates with all departments, which would include the assessors. And quite frankly, the taxes that the assessors collect probably is the bulk of the revenues in this town, so if they're not turning them over, I think a town administrator would know that pretty quick, because he's also in the budget process.
So let me challenge that. So we have language in the draft that's basically says that the town administrator will coordinate with all departments. Now, some departments are very independent and untouchable, like the electric department, for example, and to some degree, the water department. But the assessor's office is a department that an intervention by the town administrator, I think, is permissible and appropriate.
When you
I'm not
say,
saying it isn't.
when you say intervention, though, what do you mean by intervention?
Well, just what you had talked about, you know.
I'm just saying it should be referenced.
Okay.
I feel it should be
Specific.
specifically referenced,
Hmm.
because it's an important integral part of the process. But if it's covered in the financial bylaw, that's fine.
Well, I don't know if it is. I haven't
don't
read it.
know.
I'm
yeah.
looking at it now.
Yeah.
The finance director as treasurer and budget officer, and that's the issue, that this administrator will step into the shoes of the finance director, will be a joint responsibility. It says right here in section 3 of 2-36A, the finance director as treasurer and budget officer shall be responsible for coordinating the fiscal management practices of the treasurer's department, collector of taxes, town accountants department, and administrative budgeting, including financial reporting, accountability, and control financial and programmatic implications on current and future policies of all town departments and board of selectmen. It doesn't say assessors per se, but certainly he's involved in the budget process. And he really doesn't, or she doesn't, whoever is appointed, doesn't have much control over the assessors. I remember from the Government Advisory Committee, when the assessors came to us as part of our overall review of the government, they said, you know, we'd love your help, but our whole process is governed by statute and regulation from the state. So I think a town administrator most likely would be involved and would basically show me the money. And that would be his, as a budget director, to say that, whether he can go in and, he can't go in and tell them how to do their job.
Okay, well, fine. If in fact you think it's covered, that's fine.
It's
And
covered.
I can just put it right in, I can write it in somewhere in the bylaw, if that would make you more comfortable.
I think it would, but,
Okay.
but, you know, it's just a concern. And then there's the last item, and that is number 58. It says to act as chief compliance officer with regards to state ethics and open meeting law.
Mm.
Now, it just seems to me that that is a bridge too far. But I open that for discussion because it was on this list.
Could you read that again?
Yes, to act as chief compliance officer with regards to state ethics and open meeting law.
I think,
Who's doing it?
Sorry?
Who's doing it?
The town administrator.
No, I'm saying if they don't do it, who would do it?
Oh, yes, good
but
question.
when you say compliance, the problems with ethics violations, they sometimes occur when people don't even know they're violating the state ethics code. As far as perhaps, you could say, educating the public to state ethics and the open meeting law, but the town clerk already, when we got appointed, we had to take an ethics test, and we also got something about the open meeting law.
Yeah, but the town clerk basically provides the information and tracks people, but there's nobody doing it now. Nobody makes sure that every person on every board agrees with those things or has filled out the forms.
Well, that's the
or-
town clerk, though, if she's.
No, but she has no power to make people do it. And they don't. So I estimate half the people on the boards have never done that stuff.
Well,
But
when
if they
it-
don't, you're not able to serve on the board,
Well,
right?
but they're not, they're serving.
Well, that's why a town administrator, he could just have a policy, even, you could put that in the personnel procedures law, that no person serving in any town position, whether appointed, volunteer, has to comply with certifications of state ethics law.
Yeah, they can follow the compliance as far as making sure the person has taken the required classes and, handed the proper material, but on a day-to-day basis, it would be near impossible to ensure compliance of all the boards, of all the, everybody that has to
Sometimes
adhere to the
open
meeting.
meeting law violations occur inadvertently. For example, boards will go into executive, not saying it happens here, but sometimes a board will say, well, we got to talk about this in executive session. And they don't dot the i's and cross the t's to go into executive session. So that's a violation. But in an ethics violation, some people, even if you took that ethics test, you may not think you have an ethics problem until somebody points it out to you. My experience has always been, if your conscience tells you, maybe I got an ethics problem, then you should recuse yourself from involvement, but,
Well, here's my thought. Most, or at least my experience in 10 years of government, most complaints that went to state authorities regarding open meeting violations or ethics were complaints that were leveled by citizens.
Yep.
And I feel that compliance to ethics and compliance to open meeting as an individual, I don't want to use the word mandate because that's in the the national news, but it's an individual decision, it's an individual responsibility. So if I were to attach the word compliance of open meeting law and also ethics upon anybody, including the town administrator, then I'm really saying that he is the officer in charge of enforcing
that's my problem.
those laws. And we might not be able to hire someone to take on the litigation risk and the risk, the professional risk of having to worry if everybody is in compliance and whether that person should be enforcing what should be exactly what John said, and that is a personal,
Well, I think,
personal,
well, Mike said that,
realm.
I know, I would doubt that if I didn't take that ethics test, the town clerk wouldn't have sworn me in.
yeah.
Well, I'm telling you, nope. There's people that are serving
That haven't done it.
have not done it.
And could that be a-
She doesn't have the ability to enforce it.
Well, neither would well, I think we might make a recommendation that, I would leave it up to the administrator to look at the personnel procedures manual and ensure that that's a prerequisite to serving as an employee or a volunteer in this town.
That's a good point. Do we have strong enough language in the,
It doesn't mention it.
yeah, in the,
It does not even touch it.
But
The
Okay.
personnel bylaw, I looked at it, I also
That's
looked at the
fascinating.
manual, it doesn't refer to it.
Why don't we do this, that the administrator, instead of, I don't like the word compliance. They'll take all steps necessary to ensure that employees and appointees of boards cannot be hired or sworn in unless they take the state ethics test and are given a document of what their obligations are under the open meeting law, something to that effect.
and maybe we put that in the personnel bylaw. We have
Not in
to,
there now, but,
we'd
It's
have
not
to,
there now.
we may have to amend that.
Right.
yeah. And
I'd rather put it, I'm,
But absolutely, I
I-
don't care.
I think
But
it-
I did think it was important that I bring it up.
yeah,
No.
because if I, join the highway department and they give me the manual and they say, as a condition of your employment, you need to read this and abide by, the regulations of the town, including, in this case, making sure that you're compliant with ethics and open meeting law, even though a highway department member would not need those specifically, at least at open meeting, then hopefully that would take care of it. And then we have the mechanism on the other side with the town clerk at least going through the necessary motions, the mechanical motions, to make sure that, we have a pathway. If I want to be compliant to open meeting law and I join a board or I get appointed, she has given me a pathway. I need to go see her, put my hand on a Bible, you know, get sworn in, and so forth and so on. And do the coursework, like I had asked everyone here to make sure the coursework is completed, which we all did, or if it hadn't been completed, to be able to serve on this board, so, on this committee, so. I think it's a great idea. It's a good flag. You flagged a good one, and I think if we can, if you can, you know, we make a commitment, rather a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen that that is a critical item that's missing in the personnel bylaw, we gotta amend
Or
that,
the procedures manual.
or the procedures manual.
That's your job, Joe.
I will be happy to do that, yes. I'll,
I'd like to know, maybe Mike can answer this, if we didn't have compliance, you know, with those two ethics and open meeting, what was the motivation of our new town clerk to make sure that happens? And, you know, is there any type of authority or regulation that she has to do that, or it was just a good idea that she thought would be?
Well, I think it goes back to, you know, that if you are selected to be on a board, that she's the final person who says, okay, you're sworn in, you're
Okay.
good to go. So it made sense to put tracking of these other state mandates,
Mhm.
because those are really state mandates, not town mandates, that it's been done. But it's not, you know, personally, I don't think, number one, that it's being done, but also, worse than that, is there's nobody who checks up on either ethics or, in particular, open meeting law problems. So that you have committees that are posting meetings that are incorrect, not, you know, their agendas are ridiculous, you know, they're not specific enough.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we make it an obligation of education on the administrator's part to educate boards and committees and employees to the state ethics law and the open meeting law, and then they can fill in the details of how that's going to occur.
Yeah, because you could, probably what should be done is an annual, or at least every 2 years, a meeting with everybody to say, here's what you're supposed to do. And that would be nice that the town administrator used education rather than,
if you put everybody in the same cycle, it makes sense, because fulfilling the open meeting law training at the state level done online is an individual cycle. We don't all do it together, you know, unless we happen to all jump in at the same time because we haven't done it. So I think maybe a function like that where, you know, that's baked into the job description, that the town administrator needs to bring all departments together every 2 years, every 24 months,
Some of the larger communities
Be
I
able to do
know
that.
do
review
ethics
that,
training
ethics
through their
training.
human resource department.
Mhm.
And,
No, I mean, Mike, you bring up a good point. I mean, I made my little speech here, then it's an individual, but you're bringing out problems right now, and you're talking about commissions and boards and legal entities that are not operating properly. Not for any
ill
malicious
intent.
reason or ill will, just in, you know, they just don't have the professional or technical
well,
know-how.
right, and sometimes you don't really know the answer to it, you know. I was accused of, on the commission, of an open meeting law violation related to quorums. But it was not intentional. It was my understanding about the interpretation of what a quorum number was for a particular instance. And I was wrong, but, you know, I ended up being called before the selectmen on it.
Yeah.
The,
Geez, now I think about it, we should do it every 6 months instead of every 2 years.
well, see,
You're
that's,
scaring me.
goes to the issue of how much access people on boards can have to legal advice.
Right.
And I think, conscious of a budget, I think it's very important that at least the chairman, through the administrator, chairman of the various boards, if they have a problem, they should be able to get an answer from town council within 48 hours. Because when legal problems arise, the damage can be done in a very quick period of time, unless proper advice is given.
So how shall we treat this?
Can I make a suggestion? I
Yes,
wrote a
and-
note to myself. I'm gonna add to section 2, and I'll circulate it after the
Yeah,
meeting
that's fine.
for the next one. It says, I said, be responsible for education of all employees, volunteers as to the open meeting law and the state open meeting law and ethics law. I'll put more language in, but I'll add it as 2P.
Mhm.
And at least that puts it in, it throws the ball into his court or her court to come up with a way to do this. You know, he or she may say, okay, maybe every Friday at noon, we'll, you know, once or twice a year, we'll have these little,
Conflicts.
conflicts.
It may not reduce the level of the over many years, many years, the volume of, call-ins to the state with so-called, alleged ethic violations and open meeting law alleged violations, but it might help us manage them better.
And
And
usually-
certainly it provided defense to people that said, well, I went through the procedures, I went so let me just say this, for example, in every city and town and village in this country, if God forbid, there's a police officer fires a gun in self-defense for any reason, the first thing that happens is they take a look to see if the officer had the proper training. So it's the same with us here. If someone levels a complaint about ethics or open meeting law, I want to be able to say, well, you know what, I did what I was supposed to do. I fulfilled my obligation, and at least I have that as the beginning or the base of my defense, if it is alleged that I've done something wrong, so.
The ethics can be somewhat tricky sometimes as to the situation. Open meeting law is fairly straightforward, and I
Yeah.
think it's, once a person's exposed to it, the chairman could get the hang of what he needs to do. And when in doubt, you could even call the town clerk, because he or she, whoever that may be in the future, will know the procedure. They're in touch with the Secretary of State's office quite often on the open meeting issues.
Yep.
Okay,
But I'll put language in there to kind of give him
done
a
a-
responsibility.
That's really a great area. I wouldn't even thought of it.
okay, I have done my piece.
Okay, let me do a little piece here, because Betty gave me an idea about, so thank you. You took this wonderful steamship round and cut it up into hamburgers and steaks. So I'm gonna take a step back a little bit and just, help reveal this 9-page document. So what we have here, ladies and gentlemen of the town, we have a draft document. I'm not going to read the draft document, but I'm going to read one section, though. And this draft document basically is a suggested bylaw. Remember, we're going to take a 2-step process. And in this suggested bylaw, we have a section called the Preamble. Then the section number 1 is the appointment section that describes how the Board of Selectmen will appoint someone in this position. If I say anything out of line, John and John, let me know. Section 2 is the section that deals with the powers and duties of this administrator. Section 3 is fascinating because this is the financial responsibilities, and I say fascinating because this also references another bylaw that already exists, and that's called the finance bylaw. So we're not going to create things out of thin air. We're going to use structures that already work. And one of them is that this new bylaw to create and facilitate this position of town administrator is going to be bracketed by existing bylaws. One big area is the finance bylaws. And so Section 3 does a very good job of explaining what the town administrator position would be, not in detail to the degree that it's a job description, but in language that provides guidance. Section 4 is also fascinating because it's the responsibilities for personnel administration. In fact, related to that is Section 5, which deals with responsibilities for appointments, discipline, and grievances. That's a rich area of litigation potentially for any municipality. So both of those sections also reference another bylaw that already exists, and that's the so-called personnel bylaw,
What's
which
the
we,
procedures manual?
and the
too?
procedures manual, it's called the procedures manual, which we talked about a few minutes ago as well. Section 6 is the responsibilities for administration reorganization, and we've talked about that. In fact, Betty and I have talked about it when we served together on the Board of Selectmen. There's been discussion for decades about potentially how can we reorganize our government? Should we shut down some departments? Should we expand them? Should we reorganize them in some way? So giving that opportunity to the town administrator, a role in creating, new concepts, I think is very valuable. Section 7 is the evaluation. The Board of Selectmen shall annually evaluate the performance of the administrator. Section 8 is kind of a fascinating area. It's quite lengthy, but how to remove the town administrator. So, after the honeymoon, if the marriage goes a little rocky, how do we split? So you did we have 2 pages devoted to that. Section 9, filling the vacancy. Section 10, acting town administrator. Should the town administrator appointed either resign or be removed or be suspended or, God forbid, succumbs to some tragedy, there is some procedure here, some idea, some guidance as to how to appoint an acting town administrator. So, well done. I do want to read the preamble. It's not that long. I think it's a great way for the public to really get oriented about this document, and then at some point, when we feel ready, this committee is ready to have a version that we can post online, certainly we'll recommend people to read it for themselves, but we're not quite there yet. Yes, so we're going to take a 5-minute recess. It's 6:35. Come back at about 6:40, and then jump in and read the preamble, okay? Thank you. I would like to do is to take this draft number 2 document and just read out the preamble, because I think it'll be a wonderful opportunity for all of us, including the public, to get oriented as to what this document is and what it should do. And I previously went through the different sections. So here's the preamble, draft number 2, Groveland Town Administrative Bylaw. Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 41, Section 23A, allows the Board of Selectmen to appoint a town administrator for a term of 1 or 3 years. Under the statutory provisions, the town administrator acts by and for the Board of Selectmen. Collectively, the Board of Selectmen is the chief executive officer of the town of Groveland. It is charged by state statute, regulation, and the town bylaws with the responsibility for the orderly and efficient operation of town government and the safety and well-being of its citizens. The Board of Selectmen is the policymaker for the town. It sets policies and goals for successful future government administration. The town administrator acts as the agent of the Board of Selectmen. He or she has the daily responsibility for the operation of town government and oversight of its employees, special employees, boards, committees, commissions, and departments. The town administrator's duties and responsibilities are set out in the statutes and regulations of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the terms of this bylaw, and the provisions of the other town bylaws where applicable. The town administrator acts at the discretion of a majority of the Board of Selectmen. No member of the Board of Selectmen, unless authorized by a majority vote of the board, may direct the town administrator in the performance of any of his, her lawfully assigned duties. That's my favorite part. Betty's chuckling. What's your thoughts, Betty?
The preamble sounds wonderful.
Great, thank you. Thank you, John and John, and for everybody in the committee, you know, to, in the work that we're doing here to, you know, create this environment, you know, for these two gentlemen to engage in the process of writing out our hopes and wishes and dreams here, so. Mike, any thoughts?
Yeah, I have just a couple of small questions on a couple of items. Section 8, number 6, and number 7 talk about days, but it doesn't really specify whether it's calendar days or work days. So I would recommend that we put in there after each one of those numbers, calendar days, because I think that's the intent.
Very good.
Yeah, there's a big difference between calendar days and business days.
Yeah, because if you're in the process of removal, you'd rather go
Yeah.
calendar as opposed to
Because there's
business.
references in the personnel section about 7 days to appeal, 7 days to
We'll have to review that and
Yeah.
put the calendar in front of all
Calendar
those.
days,
right?
I just did, I sliced it in.
The other question I have is section 10. The last sentence says, "The appointee shall be ineligible for appointment as town administrator." So I'm wondering why we would say that.
It's, I think we're thinking more in terms of somebody from within being appointed, and sometimes, you know, it's better to get a fresh start from the outside, as opposed to,
I think also, we don't want to have that sort of internal lobbying piece that goes on in town politics. You know, you're lobbying for the job, so it's better to not have that incentive.
yeah.
Does that answer your question, Mike?
Well, I disagree, but
But what would you just want to, you?
I'd take that out if it were, because there may be somebody who's very qualified for the job, but we've just said that, because it doesn't necessarily have to be someone that works for the town. It could just be a temporary person, not unlike what the town has done right now. And then we're saying, but that person cannot be
I
the
see what you're
final
saying.
person, you know?
I see what you're saying.
I think we should remove it, but
It says, at the beginning, we say a town employee or other person to exercise the rights and perform the duties of town administrator. We could put in there, I think maybe it's a compromise, that no town employee who,
No town
Performs the
employee would
duties
be
of-
adequate?
that way it would serve John's problem of
Yes, exactly.
backbiting. You know, you
Exactly.
could get a very competent outside person to come in and you'd want to keep them.
That's
or
right.
her. So I'll change that.
Did either one of you gentlemen see any language anywhere that sort of tried to guide along the special relationship that inevitably forms between a chair of a committee like the Board of Selectmen and the town administrator? Because that could be, you know, that relationship will exist. I mean, there's going to be discussions, you know, we just read language in the preamble that basically said, let me just read this, and it's what brought it to my mind. By a majority vote of the board may direct the town administrator in the performance of any his or her lawfully assigned duties. But I think before every meeting, there's a coordination as to, you know, coordinate for the meeting, prepare for the meeting. And I know my experience, you know, even on the school committee, there's a special relationship that
Well, I differentiate that.
exists. And
I differentiate that from somebody, a select person coming in and saying, oh, by the way, I want you to,
yeah,
you know,
I see.
see, I don't have any problem with the chairman getting together with the administrator and talking shop about how we're gonna run the next meeting. You know, what should we put on the agenda? I think this is more directed to a fact, we don't want a select person going down to the Department of Public Works or the Highway Department and saying, you're gonna fill all the potholes on the northern side of town. That's what
Right.
I want you to do.
Right,
So,
okay.
and I don't know if that's gone on in the past in this town. It's not a good policy for hands-on running of any department by any, you know, one member of the board unless that board authorizes them to do it.
I got a chuckle out of this section here, but it is important, because I remember, not jokingly, Denise was a very prominent member of the Board of Selectmen meetings, you know, a contributor of information and a continuous sounding board, good or bad, but you mentioned here that the Board of Selectmen except when, the town administrator shall attend all meetings of the Board of Selectmen except when excused, and he or she shall have the right to speak but not to vote. I think that might work with some marriages as well, Mr. John.
We took that from one of the other towns. I
Yeah.
thought it was a little bit an overreach, but what would make anyone think they had a right to vote along with the selectmen? But, you know, I guess maybe we don't take anything for granted.
I guess they'll have to use the power of persuasion without the legal right to vote.
That is correct.
I think Betty approves that, because I heard her chuckle. Can we get that on the recording? No, I'm just kidding. Well, Betty, I'm glad I know you haven't had the opportunity to read this, and but I'm glad that it's sounding well for you.
It is. It's all coming together, I believe. A lot of
Great.
good ideas.
Great.
A lot of good conversation. I was thinking about when people serve on boards and getting legal advice. You know, a lot of these agencies in Boston have something called Lawyer of the Day, where you can call in and say, gee, I don't know how to handle this, and hypothetically this is going on, and get good advice so you don't get yourself into any disputes.
Well, I think that specifically, I know the Ethics Commission particularly, and I often told people, I can give you an opinion, but why don't you go and get it from the horse's mouth? And they have a lawyer of the day there that will answer a question.
The Attorney General's office has the lawyer of the day, so that, when people serve on committees, they are nervous about, they don't want to make a mistake, and, we want to encourage people to join boards and committees, so maybe we need to spell that out so they know that they do have access to information, legal opinions, and they don't have to be picking up the phone and calling town council, which generates a bill to the town.
The only problem I have with going to someone like, not that we don't have a good Attorney General, that's for certain, is that someone in Boston, for example, if somebody on the zoning board really needs some advice on zoning,
Yeah.
it would probably be better coming from town council as opposed to them calling the government department up at the, in Boston, although Mike on the Conservation Commission, perhaps the DEP gives perhaps more definitive advice than town council. I don't know what your experience has been, what you use.
Depends on the situation.
Yeah. But
Another thing, John, Christopher, you mentioned about how you can get yourself in, not intentionally some hot water. If the chairman of the board is working directly with the town administrator and, members of the Board of Selectmen they can't go off and order somebody, a town employee, potholes to be fixed. You just can't be doing that because the person you're going to feels intimidated and feels, well, maybe I need to do this to keep my job. So we have to be very
Yep.
definitive on how we go about this. I know we've tried in the past, but
I
I'm
have
sure
this-
we're going to get there, and this is a great step.
So
I
this
have a sug-
idea about what Betty mentioned and John developed also here, about, seeking some advice from a legal entity or legal authority, is that something that should be perhaps added, or if it's not in there at all, added or developed better in the personnel
I think it's
manual?
getting access to town council. It should go through the town administrator. For example, a
Okay.
zoning chairman calls them up and says, we have a case coming up, a matter coming up, we need some advice from town council. Then the administrator is very conscious of the budget that he has to submit, so he's not going to want to see a lot of cost overrun. I would assume the administrator, particularly ones who are knowledgeable after years of experience, will have some background in municipal law that they can act as a gatekeeper to say, yes, this is, and not just turn it down because they're afraid they're gonna spend money, but say, this is what you should be doing. And, oh no, we need an opinion from town council, because I just can't give you that opinion. So I think he or she has to be the gatekeeper. I don't know if that's a policy that they're gonna have to develop as part of their management.
Well, that's what, at my own personal risk, that's something that I've promised the public, and I won't say that that's coming from the board, but I've always believed, and my experience has been, that a good town manager, town administrator should reduce your legal bills, but still allow access to questions being answered by people that are concerned, are worried about whether they've done something wrong, or try not to do something wrong, because like Betty said, we're all volunteers here, basically. There's very few people on a payroll here in Groveland running this government.
There's one item that I thought to address your concerns about the cozy relationship between a town administrator and the chairman of this Board of Selectmen. My recollection, looking through a lot of the sample bylaws, West Newbury has extensive discussions on all kinds of limits like that. If you like, I will go through the West Newbury section and see if there's any reference to that issue and see if they have some kind of language that deals with concerns for that thing that you've brought out. If you wish me to do that, I will do that.
But would you run that by me again, Joe, what your concern was, that you kind of made public comment about, was it access to town council and legal budgets per se, and coming up with a procedure?
Yeah, should it be in the, so when Betty said, lawyer of the day, if an employee has an issue, I think you answered the question. I think they should go through the town administrator first. I mean, that's the screen. The screen to not only determine whether this is something that we need to spend money on, but the other screen is, hey, this is something I can answer the question for you without calling the lawyer. I, as your town administrator,
Yeah, and I think a good administrator, they,
should be able to.
in their training and education, they have some legal training.
Yeah, and my personal thing is that I remember promising to the Board of Selectmen when I first pitched this idea of creating this committee is, and of all the laundry list of items here that are beneficial to the town, one of them is that municipalities have consistently reported that their litigation bills or their legal bills have come down or not expanded dramatically because of very talented and capable town administrators.
Part of that too is being proactive and avoiding the landmines that are out
Good
there.
point.
But you haven't addressed the issue of what I was saying to you, your concern about the relationship.
Well, the
between-
relationship between the chair of the Board of Selectmen,
And the administrator.
it's going to be cozy, and
I understand that.
And I,
You want me to look in the West
Yeah, it's
Newbury
an area
statute to
ripe
see
for
what they
problems.
refer to
Exactly.
in regards to that.
because here's the case. I'm on the Board of Selectmen and I have a problem, and I'm upset about something. So now I will tap on the shoulders of the chair and say, by the way, we're not violating open meeting law because we don't have quorum, but here's my wish. Can you express my wish, you, the chair, directly to the town administrator? So that happens. Things like that happen, and it's not necessarily a good thing.
Then I will look in the West Newbury statute and see what and the bylaw rather, and see what they say.
If it can be addressed.
If it can be addressed,
Can
I
be
will
addressed.
find out. Okay?
I appreciate that. At the end of the day, here's my personal wish that the final draft really stands well and will attract comment, opinion, but not waves of edits from any source, public or government official or otherwise.
Now, that's my feeling. I really think this is very comprehensive. We spent a lot of time. I got appointed by the Board of Selectmen, but I've lived in town 30 years. Looking around this room, collectively, we've probably lived here over 100 years, and most of us have been on different boards and committees in volunteer positions. And Andrew, being the young guy, he probably isn't as aged as we, but he represents the younger people in town with families so it's a good collection of experience here, and I look upon myself as putting this for the people of Groveland as much as the Board of Selectmen, and that's the balance we've tried to achieve, and anything can be commented upon, and maybe there may be an occasional edit, but my hope is that having been asked to be on this committee and having worked hard with the rest of us, that this will be a finished product really quick,
Yeah,
so.
that's a reasonable wish. Any comments? Let me just go around the room one more time. Any final comments, questions, any suggestions for the agenda? And we'll try to set the agenda in a few minutes, but let me start off first with Betty. Your final thoughts for the evening?
I have to say, job well done, bravo. A lot of hard work. We have a cross-section of the community, a lot of, as they say, Andrew is, the new group in town, and a very smart young man. And John Christopher and John Osborne have, been doing this for a very, very long time. And Mike Dempsey, I think Mike's got a quarter of a century serving on Finance Committee. And Joe, you've served on many, many committees. So you've seen it from the Board of Selectmen's seat and from the school committee, which oftentimes we have our disagreements.
For sure. Mike?
No, I shouldn't
Oh,
say
I'm sorry.
oftentimes. I think it's become much better.
Much, much better, yeah. Yeah, we've distanced ourselves from some difficult times.
Absolutely.
Mike?
Here's a question. Do you think we will work on a job description once we submit the bylaw?
There is a, if you look,
Opinion around the table, I never thought of it.
if you look at the back of the memorandum that was submitted back at the very beginning, I think the Mass Municipal Association has a very basic job description, but if the Board of Selectmen have to negotiate a contract, I think maybe the job description should be in their ballpark. I mean, this is a job description in a sense. I don't know how much more we could do. This does describe. the
Well,
job.
here's what's gonna happen. If we don't write the job description, a town administrator will. And we may support that concept or not, to be very open and clear.
I think we can address that once we've moved this thing through.
Okay.
I think it's premature to get into that. You'll be able to sound out the selectmen at some point,
Do they
whether
want it
they
from
want
us?
to give us that job or whether not. You know, it's entirely up to them.
Okay.
I'd be prepared to help, but I have questions. I think John Christopher's point is that the administrator, the potential administrator, will come in with a standard job description, and then you'll tinker around the edges, which is maybe what we will end up doing as well. So that then the party could then, you could come to some meeting of minds, so to speak.
I would recommend, if anyone's interested, the town of Wenham on their website, the administrator's contract is posted.
Town of Wenham?
Yeah, you might want to take a look at it.
Okay. Mike, would you reflect your comment and these subsequent comments in the minutes so that it becomes a flagged item for me? Because that's another item that I want to bring to the attention of the Board of Selectmen at some point down the road when our work is done.
Correct.
Yeah, the interesting thing on the town of Wenham, their bylaw for town administrator is very brief, but they have a contract posted that's almost as long as our bylaw.
Well-
Just how you approach it, I guess.
I went through 2 superintendent hirings in my career. A fire chief, police chief, finance director, building inspector. And in none of those situations did they have a strong hand in creating the job description. And for us, it's an unusual condition to be in because, the town is in transition. So we have the blessing right now of an interim finance director that certainly could provide with some guidance in a number of areas in reviewing this. I would value his opinion at a public meeting, but I think we need to make sure that either the Board of Selectmen or we are the primary drafters of a job description or some combination. That's just my thought, because in all of those hiring situations, we gave them the job description. With the exception of the fire department, there was a process where there was a collective process to write a job description with the previous fire chief. Necessarily that seemed to work, but it was it was the outlier of my other experiences with the other hirings that I had gone through, especially on the school committee. Andrew?
As far as agenda, you said,
Yeah, you have an idea for agenda? What,
Well,
is there something we should bring up next?
well, pretty much the only thing we've considered adding to this is the information that John may bring from West Newbury in regards to the
Okay.
And
relationship with
And the ethics stuff.
And the ethics.
Ethics education.
If that's all we had, would we want to do the job description on the next meeting, or after this is submitted?
No, I think the consensus here with the rest of us seems to be that that's something we, first of all, need to advise signal to the Board of Selectmen if we want to do it or not, or be
Okay.
involved. And secondly, clearly after this document is completed and it's in its final form
Okay.
for presentation, even beyond the public, because there's going to be a presentation to the public online. And hopefully we'll solicit, and, you know, there'll be an open invitation for comments, and also a sharing of the document, near final document to town department heads. And then ultimately, we bring the final to the Board of Selectmen. Subsequent to that, we may enter into discussion about engaging in the process of creating a job description, either as an additional work for this committee or in conjunction with the Board of Selectmen. And the good news is John has related to us that there's a lot of information out there already available that exists. We really don't have to create it from total scratch, so.
Yeah.
But no, it's certainly not the next meeting, I think we would agree, so. John, final thoughts, or?
No, I think I've spoken enough tonight.
Okay. So, I'm very proud of being involved with a well-functioning committee that we can actually move things along without taking a vote. And unless someone sees an area of a vote, I think we have broad consensus to wish John Osborne and John Christopher, you know, well wishes to continue their work in the areas that we've said. I think the document is 95% completed. And like I said, if we can just build enough into it so that it's unassailable, and that it stands on its own, and that we're soliciting and receiving compliments, some concerns that can be addressed, a little bit of tweaking and some minor edits, I mean, that's a good goal. That's a goal that I think, you know, we can hold on to. So by consensus and not by vote, we can proceed with the next meeting, and essentially the agenda will consist of 3 items. The reading of the minutes from tonight, and then going into the draft document with the additions and possible subtractions that we talked about. So that'll be draft number 3. And then any possible votes beyond that point. And at that point, we may have a vote, and that vote would be, okay, this is the one we're ready to post on the web, on the town's page. And invite departments to, all right, take a look at it, please let us know your thoughts. So that might happen, so.
Just don't put our home addresses,
I'll put my home address.
our telephone numbers.
Exactly. All right, well, the only failure for me so far this evening is I did not end this meeting at 7 o'clock, which is always a goal. We're very efficient, but we went over by 10 minutes.
So we have to decide our next meeting, don't forget
So
that.
let's talk about when we'd like to meet next, yes. And again, that's really driven by the two of you, based on your ability to do the work, and
Do you
you
think
guide us as what's
2 weeks?
good for you.
Do you want to do 2 weeks?
What do you think? Now, where does Thanksgiving fall? I don't know.
26.
26?
24th.
26th,
So
is
it's 2 days
Tuesday
before
before.
Thanksgiving.
I'd prefer not to have a meeting that week.
That's fine.
It's 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, is that?
We could do the.
2 days before Thanksgiving?
Yeah, I get,
Is that, you don't want that?
no.
Okay, so
December
make it
1st.
make it
Can
3
we do
weeks
it-
then.
We could, the changes that you offered to
1
make,
week?
and what I often make, we could probably have a document circulated by the weekend, I think.
Okay, we'll do it a week.
Why don't we go next week, and then we'll come back December 1st?
I can't do next week.
Okay.
Okay.
Although, I'll do the 24th. I have, my daughter's home visiting, so I'd like to spend time. But,
Well, I mean, we have quorum, so if you do the work and then coordinate with John, then
Yeah.
you can
I
not
may-
have to
yeah,
attend, that's
yeah,
all.
that's
That
good
would be,
thought, good
this way
thought.
here, you're, you know, we're.
All
we've
the,
got-
all the weight is on my poor shoulders, is that what
absolutely.
you're telling me?
Yes, I think, I mean, you folks are, I mean, you are the subcommittee, the two of you, so that
Right.
night you're gonna be the chair of the subcommittee.
Committee of one.
Committee of one, so that would be great.
well, I may show up, I may not.
Okay,
but
that's
I'll
fine.
get the work done.
Enjoy your family, thank you for the work you've done, but if you can do the work and John can deliver it, That's good enough for me. I mean, I can't imagine that would be a
Okay.
problem, so,
Perfect, so 2
Yeah.
weeks to the 24th?
yeah.
So you're gonna make a motion to.
What is that date, please? I'm sorry.
The 24th.
November 24th, 2 days before Thanksgiving, 5:30 at the fire station until 7 o'clock. Meeting, motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
So moved
Second.
by John,
Second,
second by Betty. All in favor?
Aye.
And it's unanimous. Thank you very much, and thank you to the public as well for following.